Hi Nina, I love listening to your podcast. I know this is not a topic that you speak very often, but I am curious to know what are your thoughts on Jo and Laurie fans, and do you think the large number of them is more of a result of bad interpretation of the novel or the overly romanticized film versions, or both? An excellent question. To my experience, a lot of Jo and Laurie fans, they have a very strong denial mentality. I can give you an example. Once I was having a discussion with someone, I said that I really didn't like the way Laurie was minimizing Jo's writing in the novel. And this person said that they can't remember any scenes from the book where Laurie would dislike Jo's writing. So I took screenshots of the scenes in the book where Laurie is minimizing and making fun of Jo's writings, and this person blocked me. To me, it is difficult to have discussions with Jo and Laurie shippers because when you point out things in the novel, they close their eyes and ears and are like, I don't want to hear that, I don't want to see that. If you listen to my channel, then you know that I love to discuss about the novel. To my experience, they don't really read the book too. They romanticize part 1 and they skip over the scenes where Laurie and Jo as well are shown in more critical light, like the chapter where Laurie is imposing as John and is catfishing Meg, and those things are never in the films. So to answer your question, I think there are lots of Jo and Laurie fans who are very aware of the more problematic aspects of Jo and Laurie's relationship in the novel, but because the films romanticize them so much, it is very difficult to some to let go of that. And this is why I think the filmmakers make a huge disservice to the book and to the public, because year after year after year they keep erasing these toxic elements of their relationship, so the viewer never finds out the real reason why Jo dumps him. Here's a quote from a discussion that I had with Kara, who is a fellow Little Woman fan. There are so many men like Laurie in romantic movies. Guys who constantly bullshitting or hurting someone, but end up with the girl, and we are rooting for them because they are so pretty. Take Ryan Gosling in The Notebook. He threatens his love interest with killing himself by jumping from a Ferris wheel if she doesn't go on a date with him. Incredible Werther moment. We see it as a grand gesture and a sign of love because that guy is played by Ryan Gosling. If the role would be played by an unattractive actor, we would view his actions much differently. I always asked myself if the screenwriters and actors did read the book or only saw the adaptations, because if so, they wouldn't be that biased, I think, or they really only think love interest in Jo's age would be more contemporary, or rather, that they like this young blooming love growing into something bigger trope. But are they really people attracted to stupidity? I mean, I know a lot of people that don't care how well read or intellectual their significant other is, but it's usually people that aren't well read either and focus on different things. Laurie, he can be productive and smart when he wants to, but he also says that he went to college to please his grandfather and Jo, but he's not interested from academics, the same way as Jo and Friedrich are, and he's not also interested to work. I don't really care to discuss with Jo and Laurie fans these days anymore because it's a waste of my time. But the last discussion that I had with Jo and Laurie fans was really disturbing. They said that Louisa May Alcott didn't know what she was doing, and that Greta Gerwig's version is the only real version because Jo almost accepted Laurie's proposal. I'm not kidding with you. When I said that Laurie doesn't really have anything in common with Jo, he likes men's fashion and music, but he doesn't take his music career very seriously, I did not hear from this person again. In my Evolution of Laurie essay, I quoted a lady who had written an article called Laurie is a Nice Guy, where they wrote how they used to love Jo and Laurie together, but when they got older it began to bother them how he was harassing her and tried to manipulate Jo to be with him. In the 19th century there were many Jo and Laurie fans because no one was questioning his behavior except Louisa May Alcott herself in the novel. Now I think Jo and Laurie fans are mostly doctrined by the films. If the films would include all the messed up things that Laurie does in the novel and how bad influence both Jo and Laurie has on each other, no one in their right mind would think they are a good couple. And Jo and Laurie fans, they love to complain about Amy burning Jo's book. In the novel, Jo is bullying Amy for months. She was on a 24/7 crusade humiliating her. That's not in the films. Jo and Laurie fans, they love to complain how Amy stole Jo's trip to Europe. Jo says to the aunts that she doesn't like French and that she's better than them. And the aunts are going to France. That is never in the films. And isn't it interesting that Louisa May Alcott herself did the same trip to Europe that Amy did? The way I read that chapter, it is meant as a lesson to Jo to not put herself above other women. The favorite thing that Jo and Laurie fans like to complain is that Friedrich stops Jo from writing. This is a narrative that is entirely made up by the Laurie fans. In the book, Jo has a mental breakdown when she has to write sensational stories which contradict her own desires, and that's never in the films. So when Friedrich reminds her that if you want to be a successful and an authentic writer, you need to write things that you can stand behind and you can be proud of. And this happened with Louisa. She really struggled with sensationalism, and she felt lots of pressure when the publisher asked her to write stories that she was not herself comfortable with. And there is a quote in Louisa's journals where she mentions that her friend Emerson has given her courage to find her own voice as a writer. You can find this from the first Louisa May Alcott biography, which has quotes from her diaries, and it's never in the movies. And the filmmakers just skip over that, and then you get people like Greta Gerwig and Heidi Thomas saying that Friedrich doesn't allow Jo to write. Why haven't these people actually read the novel? Some of you may know that a book called Jo and Laurie appeared in 2020, and because of my basic principles I decided not to read it. Someone who I did a collaboration to the podcast had read it, and they said that in the novel Louisa decides to match up Jo and Laurie, but she's not very happy with that. So even a person who wrote this book, and I assume that they are a Jo and Laurie shipper, is uncertain about them and that if Louisa thought it was a good idea. Part of me thinks that is hilarious, but then I am also annoyed that they are misrepresenting Louisa May Alcott, who was an actual person. I'm looking at you, Greta Gerwig. The only way that Jo and Laurie would have ended up together was if Louisa would have ended up with Ladislas Wisniewski. He wanted Louisa to be his nanny and called Louisa his little mama, and according to some Alcott scholars, he was a con man blackmailing Louisa, and I think we can all agree that that relationship would have been a bad idea. If you want to hear more about theories surrounding Ladislas, check out my video essay Love and Sex in Little Woman. All this applies to Jo should have been a spinster, asexual. I ship Jo to a flower pot. I think she wants to be a child who doesn't grow up. Blah blah blah. None of those narratives goes along with the event in the novel or Louisa's personal life. The Transcendentalists, they had very unique ways to see the world. They were abolitionists and believed into co-education. People like Henry Thoreau and other philosophers who Louisa knew personally and that she inserted into Friedrich's character. Without them, she would not have become the person who she became. So you can't erase Jo's and Friedrich's relationship from Little Woman, because then you don't have the story of this curious intellectual person growing to be Louisa May Alcott. There's a book called Life of Charles Follen, which was written by Eliza Follen. Charles was a German immigrant and an abolitionist, and he was a hero for the Transcendentalists. And Louisa had met Charles as a child, and she liked him a lot. After Charles passed away, Eliza wrote a book about him and their relationship, and Louisa May Alcott read this book when she was 12. So both Charles and Eliza ended up becoming models for Jo and Friedrich. And my favorite quote in Little Woman is the part where Jo wonders why everyone likes Friedrich, and she says, "He was attractive as a genial fire. People gathered around him like a warm herd." And I found out Louisa actually copied this sentence from Eliza Follen. So my favorite scene in Little Woman is written by Eliza Follen. There was something about this relationship that deeply moved Louisa. I'm going to make an entire podcast episode about Eliza and Charles in the future. When Louisa was in her 20s, she had dreams about marriage and starting a family. This is what I have been doing. I've been tracing the books that Louisa read, which all worked as basis for Jo's and Friedrich's relationship. Henry Thoreau, who Louisa loved all her life, passed away when she was 28, and Henry was the model for Friedrich and all the romantic heroes in her stories. And John Surrey, German soldier who Louisa fancied and nursed in the war, he passed away when she was working in the hospital. And it is sad that people like Greta Gerwig try to justify Jo remaining as a spinster or to be in love with Laurie just because Louisa May Alcott never married. Louisa was incredibly lonely. Lots of people like to sugarcoat that. Susan Bailey once wrote that maybe writing romantic endings for her heroines was Louisa's way to cope with her loneliness or relive romantic memories. Louisa did consider marriage with Laddie Wisniewski, but like we've discussed in this podcast many times, he was very flicky and not very trustworthy. And Louisa writes in one of her articles that marriage without love is self-deceiving. And if you marry someone just because you are lonely, you are hurting yourself even more. And this is exactly what happens in Little Woman. Jo says that the only reason she could marry Laurie is because she was lonely. But it's actually really heartbreaking to read some of Louisa's letters, because she was incredibly lonely. Louisa believed to reincarnation and to immortality of the soul, and that she would reunite with her loved one in the next life. Louisa writes how she sees that her sisters are very happy, and she is happy for them, but she's sad because she's lonely, and she believes that she has had so many struggles in this life that she deserves just as much love and romance as they do, and that she will get them in the next life. I believe that we meet somewhere again, though where or how I don't know or care, for genuine love is immortal. I think immortality is the passing of a soul through many lives or experiences, and such as are truly lived, used and learned, helped on to the next age growing richer, happier and higher, carrying with it only the real memories of what has gone before. I seem to remember former states and feel that in them I have learned some of the lessons that have never since been mine, and in my next step I hope to leave behind many of the trials I have struggled to bear here, and begin to find light as I go on. This accounts for the genius and great virtue somehow some show here. They have done well in my phases of this great school, and bring into our class the virtue of the gifts that make them great or good. We don't remember the lesser things. They slip away as childish trifles, and we carry on only the real experiences. This is so interesting to me. Louisa believes that she learns and grows from her mistakes, and in the school of life and in the second life, she gets the things that weren't given her in the present. Things like marriage and family of her own, and maybe even the school that she dreamt of. This idea that reading Good Wives or Little Woman Part 2 as a sad story of yearning for childhood, it is not supported by the text or the author's intention at all, because Little Woman is about growing up as a person. But what a lot of people don't know that is that Louisa became very ill after her service in the Civil War. She had typhoid fever, but it was actually the mercury treatment that slowly killed her. So especially during the end of her life, Louisa's condition was extremely painful. And I think it's also good to remind that during this time, in the end of the 19th century, most people married for money instead of love. And Louisa was part of the movement that was encouraging people to marry for love instead of money. For those of you who have asked me about Louisa's relationship with Henry Thoreau, I agree with Christine Doyle, Alcott scholar, who said that Henry merited Louisa's lifelong affection. He was the love of her life. Now, I don't know if he loved her back. I think he loved her back as a friend, and maybe there was something romantic that happened between them. But there are too many similarities between Little Woman and the things that happened between Louisa and Henry, the way Louisa has written about them into her diaries. She wrote that she used to steal Henry from her father to have philosophical discussions with him, and this happens in Little Woman when Jo tries to steal Friedrich from her father. Henry also had a habit to carry an umbrella, and Henry also used the word Tau when he was being very cute or romantic. Look up Henry Thoreau's love poems. Friedrich uses the word Tau on Jo. Tau is his pet name for her. And like I've said many times, Henry is the romantic lead in Louisa's novels. When it comes to her love for him, she's very transparent. Henry is not the only model for Friedrich, but he sort of accidentally became part of my research when I found out how big effect this relationship that they had on Louisa's literal works. Hashtag Team Henry. Thank you so much for listening. Like, comment and share, and check out the full Q&A episode where my amazing followers asked me very clever questions about Little Woman and Louisa May Alcott. Take care and make good choices.